You are listening to the Mary Jane Society podcast, where you will meet entrepreneurs, cultivators, scientists, doctors, and inventors in the cannabis industry.
I'm your host, Pam Schmiel, marketer and publicist in the cannabis industry. BevNET is a media company focused on the mainstream beverage industry that includes producing one of the country's top beverage industry trade shows in Los Angeles and New York City each year. BevNET also creates a few CPG food and drink focused podcasts, networking events, and a print magazine. I interviewed BevNET's founder, John Craven, to get insights into the mainstream beverage industry that might be applied to cannabis beverages. If you're thinking of launching a cannabis beverage or want insights into the sector, listen in. John drops informative beverage industry knowledge worth listening to. As the founder and CEO of BevNET, and for people who don't know who are listening, if you could just give an overview of BevNET and its many different aspects.
Sure.
Yeah.
No problem. Thanks. So BevNET is a basically business-to-business media company, community, whatever you want to call us, that is exclusively focused on consumer packaged goods, primarily beverages of all types, alcohol, non-alcohol, even cannabis beverages now, food, and of course beer too. I forgot that one. And of course food, mostly of like the packaged type. Think anything you can buy in a Whole Foods or any other grocery or convenience store. And, really we're doing that through, daily website, news products. We have 4 podcasts at this point. We have conferences that we put on for people in the industry, even have a print magazine still. So, but really, our role here is ultimately to provide insights on what's going on in the many facets of these industries, and also, to serve as a sorts as entrepreneurs, try to navigate this wild and always innovative space.
Well, actually, after you're describing all that, have you ever had the desire to jump in and start your own product line, either a beverage or a food? Or maybe you're like, no way, just out of curiosity. I mean, because you have so much insights and you're really studying, the whole market.
Sure.
That I'm just curious if that's something you ever think about.
Desire, I don't know, maybe FOMO of sorts.
Yeah, FOMO.
From, I think, some of these companies that, you're reading about nowadays that have exited for insane amounts of money, or people that, have seen their journey from, in some cases, when the idea was in their head. And, I'm someone that is, been doing this a long time. Our reputation and independence are, our 2 most important things. So it's, conflict of interest. Like, I don't invest in anything, any brands, or don't even like buy stock in public companies related to the, like that produce food or beverage products. So, I guess, does that mean I want to go start my own? No, I think I'm pretty happy with where we're at.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious if you had that little entrepreneurial spirit. It just
No, I mean, I think
seems
I've
so
got
tempting.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think I'm an entrepreneur at heart who has built this as
Right,
well as,
of course, right. Yeah, that's
and
right.
I've built some tech-oriented stuff as well. So
Okay.
I have ways to scratch that itch, I suppose.
Okay, cool. So I guess the one thing that I wanted to start out with is just kind of like the basics. This kind of just will be, because there's a lot of new entrepreneurs wanting to come into the space. People like, oh, I have that great, mix, for a drink or whatever I've been
Sure.
perfecting. I bet there's a lot of new entrepreneurs. Like, as an approach, if somebody was thinking of launching, a CPG beverage, like what is the typical like distribution path? Because that's the most important thing. You've got it manufactured, you've figured that out, but how do you get to market? And I know, with different industries, there's different paths.
Sure.
Proven paths, you don't need to reinvent the wheel, and you need to know what that path is. So I think it's an important step to take because, I know I've heard, the distributor model, which I think could be two different models. It's either find a distributor who's just going to warehouse it and ship it to wherever you want to, but then there's another distributor model where they buy your product, warehouse it, sell it themselves, so they take a big cut, right? I don't know if that's common. And then, now the DoorDash and the Go Puffs, you know, and I'm also thinking of the cannabis world and a little bit of the
Mhm.
restrictions, but and then what about there's a lot of e-com marketplaces popping up, so that's where I kind of wanted
Yeah,
to.
no, I mean, I think you're sort of speaking to the reality that, I think for certain types of products, there are too many options. And I think, at a broad level, I think, it makes it really hard for new entrepreneurs to kind of focus. And, I think we generally sort of give the old, like, you should go an inch wide and a mile deep in like whatever you're doing. Now, certain categories, it is really spelled out for you. Alcohol has the three-tier system. There's no like going around that. But I think if, you're selling, I don't know, like granola bars or something like that, like, you have a lot of options. You have a really light product that's easy to ship. And you also have probably a lot of non-traditional retail that you can put your product in. They sell, I don't know, snacks like at the register and all sorts of different types of places that you wouldn't even think of, right? Whether or not they have volume or worth focusing on, like these are all the things that entrepreneurs have to deal with. If you're selling beverages, it gets a little trickier. Shipping of beverages, it's water, it's heavy. A lot of times, certain types of accounts like don't make sense. And I think to get that back to cannabis, I think right now there isn't really a well-defined sort of system out there. And, what I think brands are doing is kind of truly all over the map. There's some that are in liquor distributors, some that are going direct. I mean, I think there's brands like the brand Breeze that, the founder's posting all his e-commerce numbers on LinkedIn and seems to be doing a pretty healthy business there. So I think that is probably one of the most confusing things right now is just like where to focus with it. And for cannabis, I'm not sure that we're super close to figuring that out. Outside of maybe it would make sense for it to be where liquor and beer and wine are sold, and depending on how that works in each state. But we'll see.
But like, like if you weren't a cannabis beverage, what would be a model that you would want to follow a typical model?
So I think there is for beverage a little bit of like, a chicken and an egg situation of typically non-alcoholic beverages go through DSD distributors. They're the model that you talked about before of typically like, buying your product and then distributing it to the retailer, maybe early stage brand will be on consignment or something like that. But, picking up one of those, they're interested in what like retailer authorizations do you have? And, getting a retailer authorization before you have a distributor is a lot of times like difficult for early stage brands. So they just start distributing on their own, which maybe is the, their version of opening up the one store and having a job. You're
Yeah.
putting, cases in your car and, building it piece by piece. Companies that have more funding, could do it a little differently. There are certainly some like, kind of specialized distributors like UNFI that is, a good one if you're going into Whole Foods. And then all the way up to like at some point, I suppose you could in theory have Coke distributing your product, which generally isn't happening, or
Yeah.
someone like KDP or, any number of other sort of larger companies. But it is for sure a challenging thing. And I think, profitability a lot of times people who are building rapidly growing beverage companies are building them to sell as opposed to like, to run a profitable company. So, there are companies that do hundreds of millions of dollars a year in sales that are not profitable. It's just about continuing the story of growth and getting the exit. So it's again, I mean, there's a case
I
for every one
know.
of these possible, and I think
Yeah.
that's the only other thing I would point out is that there really isn't just like only one way to do this.
Right.
Um, and I'm not really sure that one is at the end of the day better than the other. It's just sort of like, can you execute at it? Do you have the capital and the product that is going to make that happen?
And then also, to go down the path of like the bigger distributors, they're going to, I mean, they want to see your, purchase order in hand too, but until you build brand lo or brand recognition, it's the catch 22 also. It's like you've really got to build your brand and get those sales histories kind of on a, ground level, grassroots kind of way. And then build it up from there. I don't know how Breeze has done it. It seems they must have some money behind them or something because I feel like they've just kind of come out everywhere. They're just splashing everywhere. So they have to have some marketing money behind them.
Yeah, I mean, probably. I don't
Yeah,
know off the top of my
really
head
the
what
only way to
their
do it.
their fundraising situation is, but yeah, I mean, it obviously is pretty capital intensive, and beverage in general is capital intensive. I think, there are food products like, I don't know, you could sell, if you want to launch like a soup company, you could sell little jars of soup like down at a farmer's market somewhere, right? And,
Yeah.
beverage kind of generally doesn't have a path like that. And it is, for sure one that you do need to be well capitalized to have a good chance of, big success.
Right. And what do you think about whether either in the cannabis industry, I don't know if you've seen this a lot, but in just regular drink mixes, as far
Mhm.
as like trying to, be able to sell without the bulk of the weight of the cans. Is that
Sure.
a line that does pretty well? Because it was coming into the market, so it's like those little
Yeah, of
pixies.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pixies.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, just for the greater beverage market, there are brands like Liquid IV, Element, et cetera, that are, I think, doing pretty solid numbers with those things. And they certainly allow you to have a much higher margin product, and one that's much more like direct to consumer friendly. I think, for cannabis, we've certainly seen Can do that with their little roadie things. So I think that does seem like a niche that will be viable, sort of added to whatever you're drinking. I don't know sort of if the market is maybe ripe enough for that to be like a massive opportunity yet. I suppose you could just go buy tinctures and also just add them to whatever you want, right? People clearly do that. So, it does seem kind of logical that that would turn into like a product line. And I think, what Candace created, I think that's a smart addition to their suite of products. So
Is it the little can, you mean? Or I
no,
haven't.
it's Can has like a pouch product. I'm pretty sure it's called Rhodey.
Okay, I'll look it up. Okay, can.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh, so is it powder or like
I think it's
oh,
a
so it's
liquid
like you can
pouch.
add a liquid pouch that you can add to your drink.
Yeah, so I just pulled it up real quick. It's a 2 milligram THC, zero point 0.9 fluid ounces. So it's a little,
A
but it's
little
like
roadie.
a
Oh,
little drink enhancer, add it to your sparkling water type of
oh, it's
thing.
a drink
So
enhancer. Okay, gotcha.
yeah.
I like the drink enhancers. Yeah.
Yeah, which I mean, I've seen, I mean, it certainly feels like for maybe stealth cannabis consumption, I don't know, add it to your Spindrift or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know what the data is on the low. Two is very, very low.
It is, right.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure. But I have heard somebody, I have to say, I saw the drink mixes come out in the New York market when I went to
Mhm.
a trade show. Every single booth of a cannabis trade show, all the vendors had the drink sticks added to their product line. And then I went to the trade show a year later, which actually happened to be over the summer, and there were no, like barely anybody had their drink sticks out. And somebody said, it's kind of like counterintuitive, if you're smoke like to put it into a form when this is a plant and you're supposed to be, I don't know, either
drink smelling it. I'm not sure. That's what one vendor said to me because I asked why, oh my gosh, what happened? I thought this was going to be a hit. Put it in your purse, go into a bar,
Yeah. Well,
wherever.
I sort of feel like to some extent, I guess I say this as person who focuses on the CPG industry, not the cannabis industry, but I guess I have two observations on that. One is I feel like, you know, as is the case a lot of times in CPG, like I think kind of what you're describing feels like the classic, like the industry is moving at this pace and expecting the consumer to move at the same pace, and they never
Oh,
do. And I think second, which has been a little more long-term observation of cannabis, it feels sort of similar to like the coffee or wine industries, which like, if you ever go to a coffee trade show, the people at those shows are super nerdy about smells and terroir and all this stuff, and they assume that the consumer is going to care about that, and the consumer doesn't care about that. Like consumers like, is cup of coffee good and does it deliver on its functionality? And I, to some extent, feel like that's kind of one of the nice parts about the whole Delta 9 cannabis is that no one's doing that. It's not a product where you're like, what strain is it? And like this and that. It's just like, you've stripped it down to its bare, like it's how many milligrams of THC and gee whiz. I mean, especially since it's like largely one supplier supplying all these beverages, it's like the same thing. Like it's more like ABV in an alcoholic beverage, like 5% ABV is 5% ABV. And now we finally kind of have that with THC, 2 milligrams is 2 milligrams.
yeah, yeah.
So I think that's like one of those things where like, there just feels like for cannabis to go mainstream in like beverage products, it does kind of need to get out of its own way and the baggage that it's kind of got on that front. Same with like, the stoner branding type stuff that we saw a lot of. Like we've moved beyond that. And certainly, we already mentioned Can. I think they're, sort of a big leader on doing that. It's like a
Yeah.
mainstream, like attractive looking brand, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So, that those are my my two
No, that's
observations on that.
I think no, that's absolutely right. And even yeah, and that was leading into my next question too. So but before we go there, I just want to ask you off the top of your head, would you have any numbers as far as like if somebody was getting into it, getting into the beverage CPG business, like what kind of marketing money would you need? Because it really it's just not that like, yeah, I'm opening a little boutique in a small town and it's just such a big market that you have to broadcast to. So should somebody expect just in that area when you're trying
Yeah, I
to
mean it's certainly hard to put like exact numbers on this, but I will say that I think, a lot of times beverage brands and CPG brands in general, we have this massive opportunity here in the US that's unlike anywhere else in the world. Same language, same currency over this broad area, right? And I think, if you're someone who's going to get lured in by national retailers, which I don't know if Target says, hey, we might want to test out your product, like it's kind of hard to say no, but it is, in some cases like an expensive thing to support, not just because of marketing dollars. You probably can't even put marketing behind that, but the economics of a lot of CPG companies, like they're kind of cash flow rough. It's like make a lot of this product, which costs you money, hire people to develop product, market product, sell product. And then in a lot of cases, like the deck is really stacked against you in the early days. Like you're an unproven brand. So that even the payment terms you might get is like, I don't know, some insane, like, you might get paid in months after it sells with a bunch of buyback costs and, whatever on it. So, I think if you look at what we report on BevNet and Nosh and Brewbound, we do a lot on fundraisers and, you'll see stuff that's like, sometimes people doing like small, like $500,000 raises. You also see, brands that are on the smaller side that are getting ready to go bigger and they're raising, I don't know, 5, 7, $10 million sometimes. So it is a very challenging market in that sense.
Just a lot of money. Just don't go in with your $10,000 that you think you're gonna then just,
No, it's really, I mean, certainly there are stories of companies that have really bootstrapped far, but a lot of times those are also people that, took more kind of personal financial risk in it. And I think that's another thing that like a lot of founders just don't want to do, and or maybe they're young and they don't have a home to mortgage or, don't have personal credit cards with insanely high limits or something like that. But
yeah.
yeah, it's definitely not something that, you should go into with $10,000. I mean, you'd probably be barely able to fund a production run for that.
Right. Yeah, it's not the type of business you can do this with for sure.
No.
And then so talking about like flavor profiles in the industry, just general and beverage industry. I feel like the THC beverages that I tested at your show last summer, um, are playing it really safe. Like they're just they all tasted the same to me. Uh,
Sure.
but maybe they're just trying to be safe because again, like you said, the rest of the world doesn't want to taste the strain or whatever. I don't know. Do you just have anything? Have you looked at the different beverages that are out, the cannabis beverages? What do you think about their flavor profiles and how they're coming out as a trying to introduce,
Well, I think in terms of flavor trends, I see sort of two things that are kind of happening. One is using flavors that are already proven with existing non-alcoholic beverages, primarily stuff that probably would be suitable for like a sparkling flavored water, think LaCroix, Spindrift, maybe in some cases like, functional beverages, energy drinks, stuff like that, the classic berry flavor type thing. And, there's another set that I think is trying to borrow from BevAlc and saying, hey, this is a replacement for alcohol. Let's put, bitter flavors in there. Let's make this like a sippable product. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, we talk a lot about this on our own podcast, on our Taste Radio podcast, just about sort of like, incremental innovation is kind of the thing that always wins. And, for the case of cannabis, again, I mean, for all these companies making beverages, like they're trying to get a consumer to try a new functional ingredient or maybe at least one they haven't had in a beverage, compounding that with some really, I don't know, wild flavor that you've never had just makes it harder. So it's kind of like a little easier.
yeah,
It's like, hey, here's a lemon ginger flavor or something, which you probably have had a million times elsewhere.
yeah.
Try one with its cannabis enhanced instead of, nothing or adaptogens or whatever it might be. So I think that's a better strategy for now. It is certainly safer, although I do feel that, the brands that are out there right now paving the way, like, even though there's a lot of them, like, no one's doing anything safe. This is an unproven category, at least if nothing else, in terms of its staying power. So, I would for sure be trying to deliver the consumer, flavors and formats that they're used to. That being said, I think a lot of times, and I think this category is, no exception to this, there is kind of the question of like, what is the format that the consumer wants? So like, someone said, hey, I'm launching, people drink a lot of orange juice. I'm going to make a cannabis orange juice. It's probably not really something that has super wide appeal. That's a morning drink, like, is that
Right.
when most people are testing this out or adopting it in their lifestyle? Probably not. So I think that being said, it is sort of like a question of, do people want something that comes off more like a sparkling flavored water, or do they want something that comes off more as like a cocktail? I mean, there might be a market for both, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of times, like energy drinks were a great example. Like actually, someone literally made caffeinated orange juice back in the day, but it turned out like a sparkling format was like the winning format for that. So.
Hmm.
Um, I think again, playing it safe, all these brands are testing things out in terms of like what will have mass consumer adoption. And I'm sure at some point we're going to see, entrepreneurs try to innovate with crazier flavors and, God only knows what. So,
Yeah, yeah, the different extraction, what's going to happen next? I mean, you can kind of see the market and the consumer preferences changing as far as the quality of the extraction process, which is not just a purely THC anymore. That, there's so much other benefits to it. You get a rosin extraction, which brings all the other, benefits out. It's much more expensive to do. But, people are switching even from edible products from this distillate, just THC only, into this rosin extraction is already, you could see in the cannabis marketplace, in the beverages, that is already happening. People are promoting that. So it's going to come into like mainstream, eventually. Like I love beverages. I buy beverages from my dispensary. So only in New York, and there's only a couple brands. But there is an apple farm in upstate New York, an old apple farm that now produces beverages, and they produce great apple cider infused beverage that if you heat up at night, like a nice hot apple cider
interesting.
infused, it's so delicious, I'm telling you. But anyway, so I guess then also like brands that are doing it right, who are introducing things like the functional wellness when that first started coming in. Like, okay, so well, first I want to ask, is functional wellness still in the mushrooms? Are they the hottest thing right now? Like,
I wouldn't say the hottest.
okay.
It's always hard to pick like the thing that maybe truly is hottest.
Okay.
Although at some point we'll maybe see it in retail data. But I mean, I think that's definitely like a trending thing.
So for these brands that came out like Trip and Saints and that when they were all trying to introduce like the mushrooms and the aptogens, that stuff coming out past even functional wellness. Like do you see anything that they did that made a difference to kind of piggybacking on what we've been talking about is slowly introducing it to the consumer and getting them to understand. Is it just pure marketing money that did it, or do you think that they had any? There's a few up at the top there that seemed you hear a lot about.
No,
Like,
I mean, I think, marketing money in general it's not something that on its own kind of moves the consumer needle. I think, if we're talking about, I don't know, a brand like Trip, that was doing CBD and is now kind of focusing, at least in the US, more on like adaptogens. I think, it's kind of really hard to figure out like what actually makes these things stick, but it sort of is like a
yeah.
confluence of just consumer awareness and consumer interest, health trends, things that would be really hard for anyone to just manufacture on their own. And I think that is sort of like the really frustrating part of CPG, where you're just like, you feel like you've spotted something and you're like, oh man, this is going to be huge. And you want to go out there and tell everyone. And, I always say it's like, if you find yourself being an educator, like, I don't know, you do a demo in a store and you have to talk to each person for 5 minutes to get them like bought into what you're doing, like that's not going to scale. And I think, cannabis is fortunate in that it's not like, hey, I want to tell you about a new berry that is from the Amazon that you've never heard of, but it kind of cuts both ways. And that I think there's a natural and a sort of stigma that's come with it that certainly as a society is sort of slowly, going away and reducing.
Mhm.
But there's no marketing from any brand that can move that needle faster, is kind of what I'm saying. So to some extent, you're like along for the ride. There's another sort of like corny saying that we like to talk about a lot, which is like the old prospectors die and settlers flourish, which is, a lot of times the brands that are out there like
Oh,
building the category, like unfortunately don't make it. They've just spent their hard-earned like venture capital like opening doors for other brands that are going to come in and raise money and not have to do that. So I think it's just a bit of caution in terms of like, going too fast in this category right now too.
right,
It is
right.
to some extent just kind of moving at its own pace. It's in, a bit of, I guess, regulatory ping pong of sorts, right? So
Sure
I
is.
think I think anyone who's going into this, it's like you have to be playing the long game and assuming that this is going to take longer than you think, And I think
Yeah.
again, when you get in the weeds of any of these industries, you're like, oh my God, there's so many brands. I got to move fast. And it's like, no, I mean, you need to move carefully and in a calculated way.
Yes. Yes.
And try to just make sure you've got some staying power. So
Yeah, well, it seems like, I don't know, it could be an escalation of the hemp beverages because it just seems like every day I read, because, I'm obsessed, this is the industry I'm looking at, is, every day somebody's dropping their THC, and jumping into the hemp brand. And I just saw
sure.
a bunch of California brands are dropping their edible brands and just launching drink brand, drinks. So California is a disaster. So, maybe just that flood of all these different drink brands coming out. And then also is I'm very excited for more of not the RT, what is it? The drink that won the prize at your show last year, the awards, of
The
flying something, flyers.
the Flyers cocktails.
Flyers
Yeah.
cocktails, yeah. Like that would be very interesting to me, or a drink that was a vodka that alcohol free but tasted like vodka but was infused. Like that would be very interesting to me. I'm looking for that actually. Instead
Sure.
of sitting down with my drink, I would rather have that. So that beverage, I've been wanting to check that out. I know they're in Brooklyn, but I think it's a hemp brand. So
Yep.
uh, yeah, so I want.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing more, more brands, like you said, that are, you know, going the way of just ditching, or going over to the like industrial hemp. And,
Yeah,
I think it,
a
it
lot.
seems it seems like one of those things that the cannabis industry as a whole is kind of looking down on, but it feels like it just seems
Yeah.
like it's a path forward that's going to survive. And just to, I guess, be in something that isn't directly federally illegal is, I know it's a necessary path for brands that are trying to raise money.
Make money.
So yeah, and make money. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to see that sort of diverge. But
Yeah.
I think like, it's like we talk a lot about just the non-alc movement in general, and how, and I feel like this is similar for cannabis, but in that category, there's a way bigger opportunity, like financially, for moderation than there is sobriety. And I feel like, that's another thing that is hard for some of the like entrepreneurs who started these brands because of their own life, they're, I don't know, sober for a long time. They don't believe in any alcohol, but again, the consumer opportunity is moderation. And the point I'm trying to make here is that I feel like, in the cannabis industry, it's the same thing. Like you're trying to get me, who maybe, once in a while will drink a Delta 9 beverage, but like, going into a specialized shop, going into a dispensary is kind of like, I don't want to do that. So, I think I get that it sort of like to some extent cheapens the industry that you all have built. But again, I just think, the market is sort of saying, I think, first of all, that beverage is a pretty good format for this.
Oh my God,
And,
it's fantastic.
no one's debating that, I guess. I mean,
No,
but,
no one's debating that.
again, I think it's just making mainstream approachable products that at this point are more like, I don't know, a really light beer than, a heavy IPA type of thing, or a glass of scotch.
Yeah.
So,
That isn't the alcohol, but tastes like it. I think
right.
I'm excited for it. I mean, I honestly could even see bars like that. But like you said, there's too many other people that aren't, I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. It's so hard to know. But just winding down. Oh, I do want to ask one more question is do you like as far as, everybody talks about, oh, big alcohol is going to get in and they're going to take over all these little
Sure.
guys or whatever. Where do you see like the big elk snooping around, or where do you th see them? ready to pounce. Not that you can say, oh, I see this is going to happen, but you have such a good view of the industry. Where do you see them moving around, snooping?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because I feel like, we see a bunch of different flavors of it. I mean, I think, like here in Massachusetts, I feel like, the liquor industry is like afraid of cannabis and wants to go away. And in other states, I feel like, you've got some, liquor money that has gone and gotten involved in this. And there was a point where I feel like kind of what I kept hearing from all these brands is like, we just want to be like alcohol. And, I feel like if,
Yeah,
you have multi-generational wealth that's in beverage alcohol distribution because of the three-tier system that's protected by law. It feels like if they actually had the chance to say, yeah, sure, you can have the three-tier system too with all its laws, that would have been maybe a smart move. But I feel like many things, trying to fight it and just make it go away isn't going to work either. So I don't know. I don't really know where this all sort of ends up in the next couple of years. It just feels like, you've got much like beverage alcohol, sort of like each state in a different situation, ranging from, pretty accepting to, just illegal, right? So it's very strange to me, but look, I think for beverage alcohol, they're sort of fighting like multiple fronts, on that same thing. It's like they probably could be distributing more non-alcoholic beers in states where that's legal, but they're not in a lot of places. So I think that too, they're just kind of like, this is a fad that will go away. And, it's pretty clear both of these things are here to stay, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's admittedly been a little bit of a head scratcher to understand what kind of big beverage alcohol is doing at times on this front.
Right, right. You see him popping up and snooping around, and I think Blue Pabst Ribbon has actually a cannabis lab in Northern California, I think. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I think there's some like that that have, tried to be a little more in the front, but they're still, compared to like AB InBev or any of the big spirits companies, like those are small companies. So,
yeah,
I don't know. I guess
yeah,
it'd be interesting to look back on this in
yeah.
like
Okay. I just
2 or 3 years.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's I know. It's all that's the problem right now in this industry. It's we're all talking about this could happen, we just don't we're speculating.
Yep.
And then anyway, anyway, I guess to end, is there any what do you see on the horizon for 2025? What are you telling people? I'm sure they're asking, this is like the big question you're getting, not in I mean cannabis, sure, if you have any predictions, but just in general, like how do you see maybe things, it was all about functional wellness last year. Where do you see people going this
Yeah,
year?
I mean, I don't really see any of the trends changing massively. I think we're sort of there is always like a cycle of sorts in consumer goods where there's like, new kind of categories and brands, and then there's a cycle of like proving that those should stick around. And I think we're sort of in the proving that those things should stick around phase. I think fortunately, most of the sort of general health and wellness, the non-alc stuff, cannabis, they're not going away. I think it's going to be a pretty good year on all fronts, certainly for this particular category, barring some unforeseen regulatory type thing. But I think signs are looking sort of positive after this time last year. I think there were a lot of just sort of bearish views on the investment side of things. Cash was flowing a little slower into these brands. So I think, they kind of went heads down for a while, but it feels like that stuff is, loosening up. So I'm expecting a pretty solid year this year, but I don't know, if there's some other breakout trend, again, it's hard to like see it at this point in January. It's sort of still like CPG winter a little bit. So
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. All right. And then the final is what's next on your calendar for BevNet? What's coming up?
yeah, I think, next up for us, we're hosting an event in Miami on February 11th for our Taste Radio podcast. And beyond that, myself and or my team will be at a bunch of different big trade shows, the Natural Products Expo West in Anaheim. There's the Craft Brewers Conference out in Indianapolis. I think there's also some spirits conferences in there. And, for sure, I mean, cannabis is a theme at all of these things nowadays, which is pretty wild. So,
Wow, that's cool. I might have to look at some of those just to see what they're talking about in the cannabis world. So, wow,
definitely.
I'm glad I got to meet you in person, or not in person, but got to talk.
Yeah,
to you.
definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.